what you have here is first some stuff that I took out of yesterday's video about what I like about snowmaking, and then a different video that I shot yesterday. So the theme will become clear. Now for the stuff that I probably think will be of no interest whatsoever if you don't follow most of my content. I mentioned the work of David Tian, who is, as far as I understand it, a former pickup guru who really zeroed in on the psychological aspects of why men are struggling in not just with women and dating, but in their lives in general. And he moved on from focusing exclusively on how to make men more effective with women, or how to telling them you can't make somebody into something else, but you can show them, to being somebody who's much more focused on a holistic sort of mental health for men in general. And he's got this podcast called the Masculine Psychology Podcast, or Psychology of Masculinity, something like that. And I mentioned this in a previous video. And he's got 10 universal human needs. Now, I described them as a hierarchy of needs, and I believe it was Parker who commented, typically when you mention the hierarchy of needs, you're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, this is not the same. Now, there might be some overlap, but I think this one's probably more, but I think this list is probably more accurate than Maslow's. I think Maslow's was kind of vague in general in a lot of ways, and this is probably more specific to men living in an industrial or post-industrial society. So got the old Huawei Mate SE out, and the list of, he calls them universal human needs, but he also describes them as arising in a certain order, and when one is satisfied, another one becomes active. So that is sort of hierarchical. But they are, number one, security, which can also be a need for certainty. Number two, variety or novelty. Number three, spontaneous play. Number four, restraint. Number five, significance. Number six, autonomous competence. Number seven, connection. Number eight, love. Number nine, growth. And number 10, contribution. So I'm just going to speak to my own personal experience of late. Regular viewers have followed my entry into psychological crisis, and then to me it feels slow, but it's only been like 3 weeks. So, in the grand scheme of things, it's been pretty quick. A recovery, not a full recovery, because the crisis revealed to me that I had some things that I needed to work on. I've been working on them, but it's not going to be a quick fix. But these lists, these needs. Security. This is the first one that any human experiences. You need to know that when you're hungry, when you're afraid, when you're cold, whatever, you can cry and mom or some other caregiver is going to be there. If you're just left to cry, which is a practice, it is a parenting practice, you don't really have that security that your needs will be met. And that, the damage from that can last a lifetime, or it can recur for your lifetime until you address it. Variety. This is a strong one for me, clearly. Somebody suggested that before I try any sort of, another attempt at a romantic relationship, that I really need to find a place where I'm going to be, to settle down, as it were, pick my place, and then seek out a woman in that place. And the place I'm going to try is central Mexico, just a bit south of Mexico City, in the towns of Tepoztlan and Taxco. And that'll be this summer. And, maybe I'll really like it there. I'm still going to have to come back to the States every single year, for an extended period. But maybe that will be the place where I'm spending most of my time. But who knows? I have this itchy foot. When I was growing up as a child, we moved every couple of years across the country, because of my dad's job. And so moving all the time has just been a constant in my life. And I'm skeptical at this point that that's ever going to change. But good advice. Thank you to the person who offered it. And I'm going to try to follow it. But novelty. I move around a lot. I want a lot of different experiences. I've worked a whole lot of different jobs. The downside of that being that I haven't achieved seniority in anything. I'm perpetually at the bottom of the totem pole and perpetually at the bottom of the skill ladder in these new jobs, particularly in snowmaking. Like, there's a guy in my department. He's on my shift. He's 22 years old. I'm 54. He's 22. He is a superstar at this job because he's got boundless energy, very little regard for his own personal, safety and well-being. And he's got that adaptable mind. I mean, I would call him college age, but he's not going to college. He's working. He's worked several jobs in the past, including construction jobs. And if you've worked construction, or if you've worked like in any of the, I guess, physical trades where you're actually building stuff and doing stuff, a lot of that's going to come in handy in snowmaking because, we're using all kinds of power tools. And if you're comfortable in a machine shop in a way that I, an intellectual, am not, you're going to have a big advantage over somebody like me. For me, this job is half just proving to myself that I'm not too old to endure this sort of thing. And I'm not even sure that that's true. I keep coming back to, if I'm going to come back if I need the money next ski season and I want to come back, do I want to just wait until the snowmakers have done their thing and the resort is open and the lifts are going and I can just come and be a lifty? Or am I going to come back and do snowmaking again? And as I've mentioned elsewhere, the pay is the same. One job is one that a trained animal can do, and the other is one that is constantly, like physically and intellectually and even emotionally taxing. It's emotionally taxing, and I guess this could be another benefit, something that I like about the job. There's a wide variety of people who do this job. Some of them... All right, continuing. Hopefully you watched the previous video. I don't know what the title is, but I'll put it up here on screen. I'm recording this seconds after I hit stop on the first one. So I was talking about David Tian's 10 universal human needs, and I mentioned that one of them, which is pretty strong in me, is a need for novelty. And that has resulted in me just never really settling down, just moving, going from one job to another. The thing that's been the most stable in my life, my adult life, has been the Sea Realm podcast. I've done that for a decade and a half. But everything else, including my memory, including my marriage is what I meant to say, but the other is true as well. Everything else has been... well, it's been ephemeral. It's been fleeting compared to my role as a podcaster and as somebody who talks to an audience that is largely unseen. Although in my case, I think I know a much higher percentage of my audience personally than most people who do what I do, just because my audience is so small. I've been so either incompetent or reluctant to engage in effective marketing. And I travel a lot. I hear from people, and if I hear from them, I tend to respond. And a lot of times correspondences come from that, and that leads to physical visits. And so I have stayed in the homes of many a Sea Realm listener. And I was talking to my therapist, and I was telling her that because of this job, I have this sort of network of safe houses around the U.S., places where I can just go and, there's somebody waiting for me who maybe has met me, maybe hasn't, but, they're happy that I'm there, and they're waiting with a beer or whatever, if I'm drinking, which I'm not right now. But there'll be a warm bed and a, hot meal and great conversation and conviviality. And that's a real blessing that has come from this. So that's not what I plan to talk about, but, thanks. I mean, there's probably going to be, if this is strictly behind the paywall, probably be 30 people who watch it. I bet I've met 5 of you, 6. That's a pretty high percentage. Anyway, these 10 universal human needs, I'll read them all again, even though I read them in the last video. As identified, they've come to me. I don't know where he got them, but as identified by David Tian are 1, security, 2, variety, 3, spontaneous play, 4, restraint, 5, significance, 6, autonomous competence, 7, connection, 8, love, 9, growth, 10, contribution. And he describes them as being universal, and, when one is satisfied, then another comes up. And of course, the obvious one is security. That's the one everybody needs from the time that they're an infant. And if they don't get it, then that can set them up for a lifetime of problematic, hate that word, just because of how it's been used in recent years, but, problematic coping strategies, which serve the needs of an infant who is not feeling like their need for security has been satisfied, but in an adult is, counterproductive. But I mentioned in the previous video that I have a strong need for novelty, and David Tian, while he describes them as occurring in a sort of hierarchy, when one is satisfied, another comes up, they're different for different people. Different people have different priorities in terms of, how they get their needs or which needs need to be satisfied over others. And for me, novelty is a high need, but so is significance. And doing a very small podcast, one that never, one that connected with an audience for a time and grew for a time, but then, fell off a cliff in terms of size of the audience and also production schedule. I get emails from people from time to time, fairly often, in fact. I mean, more often now that I'm belly aching about, being heartbroken and all, saying, your work has been very meaningful to me. It's done a lot for me. I remember a particular time when things were very bad for me, and, listening to the C-Realm podcast really helped get me through. Those messages, I mean, I'll respond to them and just say something like, thank you, something very simple. But that particular message that I've received many times from people is very validating, and it does help satisfy my need for significance. And David Tian, in a podcast that I was listening to just today, listening to for the second time, in fact, was talking about how people who have a strong need for significance, for them, a breakup or any sort of rejection is devastating, because it absolutely collapses their sense of being significant. And in my case, I had a 2-month, we'll call it long distance romance, with somebody who started off a C-Realm podcast listener of many years, who was, very excited to be in contact with me, to, in a very short time, refusing to communicate with me, wanting nothing to do with me. I mean, that's the kind of rejection that is, you can't help but take it personally, because this person went from interacting with somebody who was largely, a curated, fictitious personality to, learning who the real person was. And when she learned who the real person was, had to sever all connection and say, no, I don't want anything to do with that person. For somebody with a high need for significance, that was pretty devastating. And I wouldn't have framed it in those terms at the time that it happened. And something that I haven't mentioned often enough, or said, I think, plainly enough is, and I haven't told you all the reasons that she gave me for the breakup, and I won't, for her privacy, but one thing I have come to realize, and which I haven't really said super explicitly, is I think she was right to do what she did. I think that her reasons were correct. And ultimately, I think that I will be better off for it. And that had we just proceeded in the sort of whirlwind, wildfire, mode that we were in, it probably would have come to tears before long and self-destructed. So, less than a month out from the breakup, I'm already to the point where not only do I understand it, I endorse it. I think she was right to do it. Oh, somebody's going to do some donuts. Where are they? Way over there. They didn't do any donuts. They just slid a little bit. All right. I think I'm going to wander on home and start editing these. So I mentioned to my therapist that I make these videos largely as a coping mechanism, and largely because of the quality of the feedback that I get. It's less true in these behind the paywall videos because fewer people see them. But, so it goes. Point being, I very much appreciate your feedback, and I'm soliciting more. And if you have advice, you never need to apologize for offering it. If I'm telling you why I'm feeling unhappy and you think you have some insight as to why that is and what I could do about it to improve the situation, that is an implicit request for advice. So you don't have to preface any advice with, I know you haven't asked for advice, but I'm actually asking. I might not follow it, but I still value the fact that you've offered it. And I will check it out and I'll consider it. All right. Be well.